Venom, Let There Be Carnage, sequel to the extremely successful Venom solo film, at least successful financially, if not critically. The sequel is directed by Andy Serkis, who's got a ton of experience with characters talking to alternate evil CG versions of themselves, obviously, Lord of the Rings. Starring Tom Hardy, Woody Harrelson, Michelle Williams, Naomi Harris, and Stephen Graham. It's the shortest superhero film since 2007, running at just 97 minutes. Previously, the shortest one was, I think it was Fantastic Four, Rise of the Silver Surfer, some garbage like that. Anyway, Venom was originally scheduled to release a year ago, but was postponed a few times because of the pandemic. Now it's finally out, and from what I heard, it already broke all of the post-pandemic box office records in the US, also became similarly popular in other countries. Once again, becoming wildly popular across the world for reasons that escape me, if I'm being honest. I thought that the first one was bizarrely average. It didn't really feature a character that I would consider massively popular on its own, and it was not part of the MCU, and this one still isn't as well, at least for the time being. And yet it proved to be a film that somehow defied its own mediocrity and was enjoyed by a great many people, including some of my friends. Whenever I would point out the movie's flaws and things to them, things that I didn't quite like, they would just say, well, we had fun. And it seems that the sequel is following that same path, and once again, to my shock and also disappointment. The story, which is incredibly contrived, by the way, it does feel like the movie could have used some breathing room for the plot and character development. It feels like there's some stuff cut out from the film. Anyway, the story starts sometime after the first movie. Eddie Brock still living with Venom in his body, and they both get increasingly fed up with that arrangement. Eddie is called to a federal prison to meet with a convicted murderer, Cletus Kasady. Cletus wants Eddie to write an article about him, his life story. So he does, then they meet again, and Cletus ends up biting Eddie on the finger and getting a symbiote spawn in his body as well. This one is called Carnage. He ends up escaping the prison with the help of the symbiote, which means Eddie and Venom have to resolve their differences and catch the killer. So a lot of the comic book fans were pretty excited for this because of Carnage and because of Cletus Kasady. The reason is that Cletus is one of the most ruthless, inhuman, psychopathic characters in the Marvel comic book universe. He has no redeeming qualities and is just a brutal killer. The movie wastes a lot of that premise. First of all, because Carnage himself is not particularly brutal in a graphic way. It's a PG-13 movie after all, and the limited amount of killing that he does end up doing doesn't really have a lot of weight to it. He mostly just throws people around on the walls or kind of impales them with his spikes off screen, but he doesn't really do anything bloody, which is kind of disappointing. But more importantly, Cletus himself is given some redeeming qualities. He's got like a sad backstory, kind of a romance subplot, which honestly is pretty head-scratching because it's all so underdeveloped that compared to his crimes and his wrongdoings, it still does not change the fact that he's a straight-up villain with no chance at redemption. But it does take away from his very singular nature from the comic books, which leads to this very weird tonal mismatch. And that, I would say that this tonal mismatch point, it extends to the film as a whole. Between Eddie, Venom, and Cletus, it's all extremely goofy and humorous, and I guess it's supposed to be funny throughout, but it also tries to maintain that dark and edgy aesthetic and keep the subject matter serious, and it has a psychopathic murderer as its villain. So it feels like you're watching this weird thing that attempts to pull in two different directions at once. And honestly, I don't know if anyone, including the filmmakers, really knows where the line between comedy and seriousness was supposed to be drawn. I think the humor overall is pretty dumb. The writing, both the plot and the dialogue, they're just absolutely atrocious. There is a moment which I think is meant to be a serious scene based on the tone and the music and all, where Venom starts giving Eddie emotional advice, and I was just like, what? What is this? I think that the final fight once again suffers from being just an incomprehensible CGI fest with two very similar creatures, gooey creatures, just battling one another in the dark. Woody Harrelson is bizarre as Cletus. Michelle Williams is wasted as Anne, I think her name was. And also, this is a good thing. There's one moment which is just insane. So there's a section of the film where Venom leaves Eddie, right? And goes on hopping between random people as hosts. And regardless of the physique or age or sex of the person he inhabits, in the Venom form, he still looks the same. He's this large hulking mass of black muscle, right? It doesn't matter who is underneath. And then he merges with Michelle Williams, and suddenly he's got a lean, feminine silhouette with a hint of female breasts underneath it, like this sexy Venom thing. What? What is this? Now, okay, now here's the thing. Despite all those faults, I think there are elements to the movie that are entertaining. Tom Hardy is clearly having fun. Carnage looks pretty good for the most part in terms of visual effects. The bromance aspect of Eddie and Venom is fundamentally funny, even if it suffers in execution because of the cheap dialogue. I will also admit that I did laugh out loud at the one allowed use of the word fuck in the film. I know it's cheesy as all shit, the way it's done, but it fits this film really well, and I just wished at that moment that we had more profanity from Venom, because that would be hilarious. So let me put it like this. I don't think this is an outright terrible movie. It's just that it feels very bizarre and goofy, and it's kind of average as well. And it made me think that it resembles a movie that a 12-year-old me would have loved to see in 2004. But since then, I grew up, and I think the world around me has moved on as well, including movies, which means Venom is almost like this time traveler from the past, a movie out of its time, something that is accidentally very dated, but not to the period in which it came out. It's a film that sort of ignores everything that happened around us in the past 20 years or so. I personally didn't like it. I think it's aggressively mediocre, and sure, art is subjective, so I don't mind that a lot of people will probably enjoy it for what it is. But the fact that this type of film can be so successful commercially does make me sad for all the less successful movies, which I would consider a higher form of art than this one, which, believe me, would be a very, very, very long list.